Well, that was a weekend, and he went and called and said, Jim's dead.
For over 5 decades, Jim Morrison's tragic end has been wrapped in confusion, secrets, and cover-ups. Found in a Paris bathtub at just 27, the story never added up. No autopsy, no investigation, and too many people staying quiet. But now, long-buried details have finally surfaced. Unheard accounts and shocking connections that turn everything upside down. It's far worse than we think. And once you hear it, you'll never look at his story the same way again. Join us as we find out what really happened to the famous Lizard King. The Jim Morrison Mystery. 3 months before the end of his life, Jim Morrison walked away from Hollywood. He had lost control. The man who once moved like a rock god now struggled with everything. His body had changed, bloated and heavy, covered by a full beard. He was drinking too much, more than ever. Every day during the recording of L.A. Woman, he drank endlessly, sometimes downing over 30 beers in one stretch. His voice had begun to weaken and words no longer flowed how they used to. Writing lyrics had become a battle. The creative fire that once pushed him forward was fading. So on March 11, 1971, he left for Paris. He wanted to pull himself out of the hole he had fallen into. His plan was simple: rest, lose some weight, and stay away from alcohol. He wanted to find his old self again. Paris felt like the right place for that. He had gone there before and liked how he could blend into the crowd. It gave him a break from the pressure and from people who kept watching his every move. There, he stayed in an apartment at number 17 Rue Beautreillis with Pamela Courson. According to the most accepted version of events that played out on the night he passed away, after going to the movies together, the two of them returned home. They sat down and watched some short Super 8 films from a recent trip to Morocco. After that, Pamela went to bed. Jim stayed up a little longer. He listened to old Doors records, maybe trying to stir up some feelings from the past. He had been coughing badly all evening, and it wasn't going away. Later, when Jim came to bed, he woke Pamela and told her he was feeling ill. An hour passed and he got up again, this time in worse shape. He went into the bathroom and threw up a small amount of blood. Pamela wanted to call a doctor, but Jim asked her to run a bath for him instead. He thought the water might help him feel better. She filled the tub, and Jim stretched out in it while she went back to bed. From the next room, she heard him call out for her. Those were the last words she remembered hearing from him. When Pamela woke up a little after 6 in the morning, she noticed he wasn't lying beside her. She called out to him but got no response. She walked to the bathroom and found him in the tub, completely under the water. There was a faint smile on his face. At first, she thought he was joking. She shook him, but he didn't move. She panicked and called the fire department and then the police, but they couldn't save him. He was gone. Jim Morrison's body remained inside the apartment for 3 days. Meanwhile, Pamela and a friend named Alain Ronay took on the task of planning the funeral. They didn't have much money or time. They picked the cheapest coffin they could find, one that cost about $75. While they waited for the undertakers to bring the coffin, they wrapped his body in plastic and surrounded it with dry ice to keep it from breaking down too fast. At some point during those 3 days, a doctor came by, wrote a death certificate, and listed heart failure as the cause. No autopsy was done. When Bill Siddons, the manager of the Doors, landed in Paris on July 6, it was already too late. The coffin had been sealed, and the death certificate was already signed. He didn't get the chance to see Jim's face. In fact, only Pamela and Ronay saw the body before it was buried at Père Lachaise Cemetery the next day on July 7. Ronay handled the paperwork to make sure Jim could be buried there. The plot came with a 30-year lease. That lease ran out in 2001, and the grave still hasn't been opened. Siddons and Pamela flew back to Los Angeles the next day. When reporters asked about what had happened, Siddons gave a short public statement. He said he had just come back from Jim Morrison's funeral in Paris and that Jim had passed away from natural causes. But this came 6 days after Jim had passed away. That delay caused people to grow suspicious. Things didn't add up. No one ever found out if police had looked into it properly. No medical examination was carried out. More interestingly, no one could figure out who the doctor was. His name on the certificate couldn't be read. Pamela, surprisingly, said she didn't remember the doctor's name. Even more troubling, Jim's parents were not informed. Pamela had told the American embassy that Jim had no family. Because of that lie, she was able to move forward with the burial quickly. There were no formal procedures. There was no priest, no ceremony. No one from his family was there. In just a few days, Jim Morrison vanished into the ground in a foreign city. Those who loved his music never got to say goodbye. The man who once filled arenas with his voice was laid to rest with little notice, in a coffin no one had picked with care, under a name few had the chance to read. Everything happened fast, with too many details left behind. The events surrounding his sudden demise has led the public to suspect foul play. It was a mystery nobody could figure out, until another account of the event came to light. Different theories surrounding Jim Morrison's demise. Jim Morrison had always lived on the edge, and his lifestyle made people talk. He drank too much, stayed out late, and used hard substances, even though many around him warned him to slow down. Still, his fans followed him with great passion, never turning away even when he began to lose control. But during the late 1960s, the government began kicking hard against that culture. Officials didn't want popular figures making substance use look acceptable. Their goal was to shut down any form of influence that enabled this behavior. This pressure didn't only affect Jim. Several other famous people from that time claimed that government agents had come to visit them. These officials didn't just give advice, they gave threats. If someone didn't stop using hard substances or change their image, they were told that their career would fall apart. Some were even warned that their lives could be at risk if they kept going down the same road. Stories like this were difficult to prove. Some people believed right away, while others felt the claims were exaggerated. Eyewitness accounts kept changing, and new versions of events kept popping up. Over time, it became hard to know what was true and what wasn't. While some believed this was part of a deeper conspiracy, like a secret organization trying to control celebrities, others felt it was simply about keeping a public image clean. They thought publicists, managers, and close contacts were behind the cover-ups, all working to protect their client's brand. When Jim Morrison passed away in 1971, people were shocked. The news came fast and without warning. He was only 27 years old, living in Paris and far away from the chaos of Los Angeles. His demise was sudden, and his team moved quickly to manage how it was handled. There was no official autopsy, which made the situation even more confusing. The papers said Jim had passed away from heart failure, but people started pointing out strange things. The doctor who signed the certificate could not be found afterward. No one knew where he had gone. Some said he didn't even exist. Jim's passport, which should have been with him, was never recovered. These missing pieces began to feed rumors and doubts. Others recalled memories of Jim talking about leaving everything behind. He had once said he wanted to escape the spotlight and the pressure that came with fame. He had even joked about faking his own demise and disappearing to another country, living under a new name, far from anyone who knew him. However, the mystery deepened when Danny Sugarman, someone close to the doors, shared a theory. According to him, Jim's girlfriend, Pamela Corson, had started using a hard substance and had tricked Jim into thinking it was something else. Jim had a fear of needles, so they had taken the stuff by snorting it. That summer in Paris, a strong form of illegal substance known as China White had been going around. It was very dangerous, especially for people who had never used it before. Sugarman believed Jim became sick from the substance, took a bath to feel better, and then passed away unexpectedly. Pamela passed away from an overdose just a few years later. Still, people who had known Jim closely refused to accept this version. They said he didn't touch hard substances and had strong feelings against it. They believed he may have drunk too much and taken pills now and then, but not that particular hard substance. Their memories clashed with Sugarman's story, making things more confusing. Over time, more people came forward claiming to have seen Jim alive. Some said he had been spotted in remote places, far from the world he once ruled. The stories were always vague. Some described a man who looked like Jim riding horses in the Midwest. Others talked about him writing poetry in some distant land. These tales only added more fuel to the fire. Even people who had worked closely with Jim admitted they had no real answers. Too many theories floated around, too many secrets that were never fully uncovered. The truth, if it ever existed in one clear piece, was hidden behind years of confusion and half-remembered details. Still, through all of the rumors, one thing never faded: his voice. Jim's songs stayed alive in memories, records, and radios. The mystery around his end only made people hold on tighter to what he left behind. Whether he truly gave up in that Paris apartment or found a way to start over somewhere else, the world kept wondering. Even after all this time, the full truth remained just out of reach. But there was a particular version that seemed to gain more attention. Before the end, The cover-up. Official records stated that Jim Morrison passed away from natural causes and he was found in the bathtub of his apartment. That story remained untouched for many years, but behind that version another account had been quietly buried. A different and darker version slowly began to rise years later, told by someone who had been close to Morrison at the time. His name was Sam Burnett. He once worked as a club manager, wrote for newspapers, and personally knew Morrison. According to Burnett, Jim Morrison's life did not end at home. He believed Morrison took his last breath inside the Rock and Roll Circus, a nightclub located in the left bank of Paris. It happened in the early hours of July 3, 1971. Morrison had gone to the club that night, not for fun, but to get a hard substance for his girlfriend, Pamela Corson. He didn't appear unwell. He seemed like someone with a goal. After making his deal, he headed straight to the club's bathroom. Time passed, but Morrison didn't come out again. One of the cloakroom workers noticed something strange. Someone had locked themselves inside a bathroom stall and wasn't answering. The situation began to feel serious. Burnett asked a bouncer to force the door open. When it swung back, the sight inside shocked them. Morrison was there, motionless, leaning over the toilet. There was foam around his lips. Blood had formed too. To those watching, it looked like he had snorted something too strong, something that pushed his body beyond what it could handle. Morrison had always been afraid of needles, so he never injected himself. He stuck to snorting, but even that was enough to take him down that night. Burnett didn't just stand there. He found a customer in the club who worked in the medical field. The man checked Morrison and said it was too late. His life had already slipped away. Just then, panic started to spread. A famous musician had passed away inside a nightclub. That kind of news could ruin reputations, careers, and businesses. Then things took an unexpected turn. A group of people suddenly showed up. They were Morrison's dealers, and they refused to believe he was gone. They insisted he had only passed out and needed help. Without asking permission, they lifted his lifeless body and took him out of the club. They claimed they would handle everything. Not long after that, Burnett received a strange phone call. Someone, possibly tied to the club's owner, told him to forget what happened. He was warned not to speak a word to anyone. Whatever had occurred that night needed to stay buried. They wanted the whole thing erased, as if it had never happened. The cover-up began right then. Morrison's body was moved from the club to his apartment. They placed him inside his bathtub, making it look like he passed away there. That version of the story made it to the official reports. It became the public truth. Others were there that night too. One of them was a young woman named Marianne Faithfull. She was well known in the music scene and often found herself close to events like these. She was in the bar when it all went down. According to Burnett, she also stayed out of the matter. She never brought up that night again. Even decades later, she refused to talk about what she saw or heard. Her silence only added more mystery to the night. Years passed, but Burnett held on to the memory. He didn't try to share it earlier. Maybe the weight was too heavy to carry around anymore. He finally decided to speak, sharing everything in a book that aimed to bring the truth into the open. His story added a whole new layer to Jim Morrison's final moments. It replaced the image of a rock star fading away peacefully in a bath with something far more disturbing: an overdose in a club, a rush to hide the truth, and a network of people who helped cover it up. By the time Burnett came forward, the legal clock had already run out. French law only allows 20 years for criminal cases like this. That time had passed. But civil courts might still take an interest, especially if new evidence gets reviewed. France's police confirmed that they would have to consider anything new. Whether anything will be done remains uncertain. The story doesn't try to glamorize Morrison's end. It shows the dark surroundings he found himself in. What happened that night stayed buried for too long. It wasn't just about one man's overdose. It involved secrecy, pressure, and fear. It revealed how a famous life could vanish behind a wall of lies, all built in just a few hours. As more people step forward with what they know, the old version of the story might start to fall apart. And with that, the real pieces of Jim Morrison's final night could finally come together, piece by piece. To be able to understand why the Jim Morrison case was so serious, let's take a look at his journey to fame. Rise of the Lizard King. Jim Morrison was born into a military family. His father, George Steve Morrison, served as a high-ranking officer in the United States Navy and eventually became an admiral. His mother, Clara Clark, had a job in the Navy's Public Relations Department in Hawaii. That was where she met Steve during the war. Both of them happened to be in Hawaii on the day Pearl Harbor was attacked. After that, they stayed close and got married in 1943. They went on to have 3 children, and Jim was the first. Because of Steve's work, the Morrisons had to pack up and move from place to place very often. Eventually, they settled down for a while in Alexandria, Virginia, a suburb near Washington, D.C. That was where Jim finished high school. He did well in his classes, but he also stood out for refusing to follow rules. He spent a lot of time with books and read deeply. He picked up Greek literature, got interested in French poets like Arthur Rimbaud, and went through the pages of writers from the Beat generation like Jack Kerouac. As the family kept moving, Jim often felt like the odd one out. Instead of getting close to people right away, he stayed in his own space, holding on to stories and poems. That habit stayed with him, and he began writing his own poetry in those teenage years. When it came time for college, Jim started in Florida, enrolling at St. Petersburg Junior College in 1964. Not long after, he found a small local cafe called the Beaux-Arts Coffee House, where people went to share music, thoughts, and art. Jim got up there and read his poetry out loud. It was a new step for him, one that brought his writing into the open. Afterward, he moved on to Florida State University, but didn't stay long. He soon transferred again, this time heading west to the University of California in Los Angeles. There, he focused on film studies and began thinking more seriously about performance and expression. It was in Los Angeles that everything began to change. At UCLA, Jim crossed paths with Ray Manzarek. They both had a creative spark and shared ideas about music and art. Together, they decided to form a band. Soon, they brought in guitarist Robbie Krieger and drummer John Densmore. They chose to call their band The Doors, a name inspired by Aldous Huxley's book The Doors of Perception, which referred to an old line by William Blake. The name fit their style perfectly. The group wasn't just about music. They wanted to open new paths in thought and experience. During the mid-1960s, they played regularly at the Whiskey A Go-Go, a nightclub on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles that had already built a strong reputation. Their time there helped them build a local following. Eventually, Elektra Records signed them, and they began releasing songs that grabbed attention right away. Hits like Light My Fire and Hello, I Love You reached wide audiences. Their albums, especially The Doors and L.A. Woman, pulled listeners into dark, poetic worlds. Jim's deep voice and unusual lyrics gave the band a bold identity. He didn't just sing. He told stories filled with mystery, desire, and danger. He also crafted a stage image that pushed boundaries. Dressed in tight black leather pants, moving with intensity, he performed like someone caught between a dream and a nightmare. He called himself the Lizard King, creating a strange, mystical character that captured people's attention. But offstage, things grew messy. Jim drank heavily, used hard substances often, and showed little concern for how far things could go. His behavior became harder to manage. In 1969, during a show in Miami, he caused a scene that led to serious trouble. He was accused of pulling down his pants in front of the crowd and using foul language. A court later convicted him. He got a 6-month prison sentence, but he was allowed to stay free while he appealed the decision. That appeal process stretched on for some time. As the 1970s began, the music world suffered heavy losses. Jimi Hendrix passed away, then Janis Joplin followed. Both were young, both taken by illegal substances. Around this time, Jim spoke about the idea of ending life with a strange, careless tone. He seemed aware that the same danger could come for him, but instead of changing his path, he kept moving further into the shadows. Not long after his Miami case was left in limbo, Jim left the United States. He flew to Paris and settled into a slower rhythm. He went there with his longtime partner, Pamela Corson, who had been using a hard substance for a while. By then, Jim had pulled away from the band. He wasn't performing, and he had stopped recording. His focus had shifted to writing, reading, and staying out of public life. Paris gave him space to breathe differently, but it also pulled him deeper into himself. He had only been in Paris for a few months when everything stopped. His body was found in the apartment's bathtub. The cause was officially reported as heart failure, but the details remained vague. Pamela was the only one present at the time, and her own struggles made everything even more uncertain. In just a few short years, Jim Morrison had risen fast, burned bright, and was gone. His words, his voice, and his presence stayed behind, still haunting the world of music and poetry. Gone too soon. When the news of Jim Morrison's demise spread across the world in July 1971, many people found it hard to believe. He had been known for living without limits, always chasing after something bigger, something deeper. His fans were shocked, and many of them couldn't accept that he was truly gone. Some believed he had just stepped away, trying to escape the life he had built. Others felt something about it didn't add up, but the facts were few and confusion kept building. People who had followed his music for years gathered together. They stood around in parks, on streets, and in music stores, looking for answers or just trying to feel close to him in some way. Radios kept playing his songs on repeat. His voice filled rooms, cars, and bars as people tried to hold on to the parts of him that were still around. His fans clung to those lyrics, the sound of his voice and the mood of his music. It was all they had left. Across the cities of America, especially in Los Angeles, people talked about Jim everywhere. Young people brought out old records, while older fans spoke about seeing him perform live. Many felt like something had been taken from them too soon. Some cried, others just sat in silence, not knowing what to say. He had touched people through his music, through his wild presence, and through the way he never held back. The timing of his passing added more weight to everything. He was only 27, just like some other famous musicians before him. After Brian Jones passed away at the same age too, it began to carry a strange meaning, leading to the creation of the 27 Club. People started to connect his case to something larger, something that felt beyond control. His sudden end made others stop and think about the way he had lived and what his life had truly been about. In Paris, where he was buried, a small crowd showed up at the cemetery. At first, the space around his grave looked plain and simple, with nothing to explain who he really was. But it didn't stay that way for long. People kept showing up. They brought candles, records, and poems. Some played his songs through small speakers. Others just sat and stared at the ground where he was buried. Over time, the place became a spot where people came from around the world just to feel something real, even if only for a few minutes. The media covered his tragic demise for weeks. Photos from the past were printed again and again. Old stories about his time with the Doors came back into the spotlight. Some talked about his behavior, how he pushed things too far. Others focused on the music, the words, the way he moved on stage. There were arguments too. People tried to figure out what had truly brought him down, but nothing ever really cleared it all up. Even without answers, his image started to grow. The confusion around his sudden end made people see him in a different light. He had become something more than a man. Some saw him as a symbol of rebellion. Others thought of him as someone lost in a world he couldn't understand. Either way, people wouldn't stop talking about him. Movies were made, books were written. Each one added a new piece to the story, even if they couldn't tell the full truth. His life became a puzzle that never got solved. In the years that followed, the love for Jim Morrison never faded. His records kept selling. New fans kept showing up, drawn in by the power of his voice and the mystery around his life. At the same time, the Doors continued to grow in fame. The songs that once shocked people now played in homes, concerts, and even commercials. His words stayed alive. His performances were replayed, studied, and admired. Young bands looked up to him, hoping to capture some of the same raw energy. People began to mark anniversaries of his passing. Every year, crowds would gather at his grave in Paris, bringing with them messages, artwork, and personal memories. Some would sit down and write letters to him. Others would leave behind old lighters or drawings. The rest simply played his music and let it move through them. It became a way for people to deal with their own struggles by reaching out to someone who had faced his own. Even those who didn't grow up with his music came to understand his impact. As the world changed, the memory of Jim Morrison held on. He never faded into the background. New artists kept bringing up his name, either in interviews or through covers of his songs. His story stayed alive in people's minds, not just because of the way he lived, but because of the way he left. To this day, fans still visit his grave in Paris. Jim Morrison gave people something that didn't fade with time. Through all the confusion, through the pain and wonder, he left behind something strong, and somehow it keeps pulling people in. What do you think really happened to Jim Morrison? Let us know your views in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.